Okay, so I wanted to do a review of Alan 2, especially using the path tracing and DLSS 3.5 ray reconstruction. It really is something else. And you can see some of the reflections there at the moment. I've got everything whacked up on a 4090 and it looks quite remarkable. I'm just going to flick through some of the settings just so you can see what it looks like. All of the options are on. I am using DLSS quality in this at 3440 by 1440. And you can see ray traced reflections and path traced reflections are very similar, but there's subtle differences, especially when you turn on ray reconstruction. So I'm just going to turn reconstruction off and on. There you can see a preview. I would have liked the preview to be a bit more clearer. It's got like a filter in front of it, so it's not as clear when you're seeing the differences, but it's nice that they're showing you the real-time differences as you toggle the settings. This video is going to be a playthrough whilst I comment throughout the video, so I just feel it's a bit nicer to do it that way rather than just gameplay segments that are just mashed together in a compilation and then the reviewer talking about it. I think it's better to show it in play, so I'm playing the game now the first time through these segments, and it's just me progressing through with a view to then add commentary after the fact. So here's just some reflections off the picture frame on how it looks off the window. And shadows cast as you move in and out, depending on the distance. The shadows will be different definition, not blocky or anything like that, but it just feels and seems real, how you'd expect it to behave in real life. Shadows are cast on the wall from light sources behind as well, which is quite cool, and you can see how it's getting softer as Saga moves away from the wall. It becomes more diffused and more defined as she moves closer, so that's quite cool to see. The settings themselves are quite quirky in that when you set the presets to low, it doesn't set all of them to low. The same applies to high. Not all of the settings are then set to high. Kind of doesn't make sense. Not sure why they did that. So it does mean you do need to then manually go in and either lower settings or increase settings if you want just full whack maximum, assuming you've got a 4080 or 1490. But you can see they're on low without ray traced shadows. You don't get some of the shadows from light sources. So from that window, it's not casting a shadow on the wall, but the object shadows and prop shadows from the torch are being perfectly done. They're just not they don't change in softness as the distance increases. They seem to be a defined hardness around their edges, but they're still good quality, even on low. Screen space reflections obviously on shiny surfaces now, so as you get closer to the surface, the reflection will change. That's to be expected of screen space. I did read that this game does use a software ray tracing reflection on higher settings if RT is off. So if you turn RT on, it uses hardware ray tracing. If you turn RT off, it uses software. Which probably explains why RT versus screen space maximum looks very similar, just because it's using software. Obviously there's a performance difference between the two. And now we're back to the reflection. So you can see there now you can't see much of the outside. It's more of a screen space based approximation of that reflection. So we're going to turn on the settings back. Set it back to the high preset. And now I'm going to manually toggle those settings back again. There are a bunch of options to go through, which is quite nice to see. They haven't skimped on the settings. The only thing I haven't found is reflex. NVIDIA's page itself does state this game uses reflex, so either it's doing it internally by default, giving you no option to toggle it, or it isn't there at the moment, and that's a bug which needs to be patched. Nevertheless, I haven't found any issues with mouse latency, so it's fine so far. DLDSR does work in full screen. I use native resolution of my 144Hz OLED just because it just seems a bit nicer, to be honest. The visual quality doesn't change too much, the sharpness and everything like that doesn't change, but the internal resolution is higher. So for those on a 4K display, you can use this with DLSS performance, and the textures and everything look perfectly fine. On a 4090 I'm getting around about 80 FPS, 75, 80 FPS. And it can hit 100 FPS or 111 when enabling frame generation. But I tend to play without frame gen in games like this. Not really needed when the FPS is so high anyway. It's an interesting one there as well. So in that room, the window was casting shadow on the floor and wall as Saga moved around. But on this area, as the sunlight's shining through the open door, it's only casting shadow where the sun hits, not through the ambient lighting that's coming in. So that indicates baked global illumination, or at least baked illumination from that door area. And we'll see more of that a bit later on as well. So just in Bright Falls at the moment, just looking around. This is frame generation. An issue I've found is there is some frame jittering with frame gen enabled. Turning frame gen off, you don't get that. I don't know if the video will show that clearly. It's only 60 FPS in the video, and YouTube's going to play back at 60 FPS. But in person, on my QD-OLED, it is noticeable, and I find that quite annoying. That's another reason why I turn frame gen off. If I wasn't able to maintain a good frame rate with frame gen off, then I'd use frame gen and just put up with the frame jittering until it's patched out, hopefully. But on your displays, you may not notice it. As I say, I've got a QD-OLED, so any sort of frame pacing or frame motion issues are more obvious. And that's even with G-Sync enabled. So I'm just turning off the RTSS overlay there just to see what the current goal is. And I'm going to flick back to native res and DLSS quality. You have the option for native res as well using DLAA, but there's no distinct native option for use with either without MSAA or TAA. So they're relying on at least the minimum of DLAA for native rendering for AA, which is fine. I know some purists do want just a pure native render, but DLAA is perfectly serviceable. It's actually more the preferred one for a lot of people. But for myself, I prefer DLSS quality in pretty much any resolution. So here's one of the quirks I was on about with path tracing. We're in path tracing at the moment, and if you enter a dark room like this, there's no light spill coming in, even though there should be really. And when the door's closed, it's pitch black, but Saga is more or less well lit. And when I turn the torch on, there is bounced illumination, which is as you'd expect, which is normal. But in complete darkness, this game isn't completely dark. And this is one of the few areas where if you close the door, black is pitch black. But in all other areas of the game where there's any light source, there is a sort of like a black crush. All black areas look like a really faded dark grey, or just a light black kind of colour. So on an OLED, that can be quite jarring because you're expecting pitch black, but it's just slightly lifted. There's no amount of settings you can change to fix that, so this does seem to be an aesthetic choice by Remedy. Probably to make it look more cinematic like a Hollywood movie. So just exploring a few of the other rooms just to see what they're like and see if there's anything to loot. In this room, there's no light cast shadow from the window, which is a bit strange as well. So it does seem to be either these areas were missed or they've purposefully not enabled it for these areas. Whether it's a cost-saving thing for performance or not, I don't know, but the fact that I've got everything on maximum with path tracing, you'd expect any emissive light source to at least cast some shadow, but this is just 100% baked. So what I like to do in games like this is just explore all the rooms and just pick up whatever I find. The inventory isn't small, so you can pick up and collect a whole bunch of stuff, and it does get bigger as you go along as well. I'll show the inventory a bit later on. Mirrors do show reflections as well, so unlike Cyberpunk, where you can only see your reflection once you go to a mirror and click to view yourself, you can see yourself in all mirrors and shiny surfaces in this game, which is quite cool. Now you can see in the corridor here, that window at the end is casting a shadow, or a long shadow, but it doesn't as you get closer to the window, which is a bit strange. Or maybe it's not strange, it does diffuse, so the closer you get, whereas it should be more defined the further away you get to a point. And now we come here, so now you can see there's no shadow being cast on the floor in front of Saga, where you would expect it, just like in the corridor, whereas static objects do cast a shadow. So again, path tracing, you'd expect everything to cast a shadow from the light source, so that's something that's been baked in, and more than likely it's a cost savings compromise. It looks convincing until you scrutinize it effectively. Now here's the inventory. It's really Resident Evil in its approach. It's nice to use. You can drag and drop, equip, set a quick slot. So just like Resident Evil, if you've used those, played those games before, then exactly you know what to expect here. So this is Saga's Caseboard. Alan Wake has his own plot board where he writes the stories and you can investigate those. And the idea is as you progress through the levels, you'll pick up clues and evidence, and you can then attach those to Saga's Caseboard, which then gives you more goals to then complete mission objectives and go to the next area. You can do these in whatever order you like. That will be made more clear a bit later on once we do Alan's segment. So as Alan unravels some parts of his story and writes them in the typewriter, Saga's part of the story will also change as well. One thing I did find was some of the reviews and some of the previews hinted at you being able to switch between Alan and Saga at any point. That's not really true. You can switch between them whenever you want, but not wherever you want. You can only switch in breakout rooms where there's a flask to quick save. So that room contains the quick save points and the points where you can switch between Alan and Saga.
Why couldn't it have been a romance?
But once you do that, you can play for as long as you want to a point as Saga or as Alan. Both of their stories kind of align, so you have to get to certain points before you can progress with the other. But the order in which you do it doesn't really matter. At least not what I found so far in the 14-ish hours that I've been playing. So here I'm just reading what the evidence and case data tells me and then correlating that with the post-it notes on the wall. And it's quite self-explanatory. You do need to do a bit of reading. Some of the times it seems a bit much. I've read some comments on forums where people say it just feels a bit tedious doing the caseboard stuff. I kind of agree to a point. If you've got a lot of caseboard items that you haven't pinned yet on the wall, and you look at your scroller along the bottom there, carousel, you can just get overwhelmed by it and think, oh, I don't want to do this. But you kind of have to progress. So it's kind of annoying that you don't have the option to turn this off and just let it auto put the things on the wall and give you the goals. That would have been nice to have as an option. But the fact that you have to manually go through it each time, if you're doing repeated playthroughs and you know all, you don't want to go through all of this manually. There's no button to sort of splash them all on the wall, so to speak, which would have been nice.
Think.
And the last one. So they've obviously lifted this off of Hollywood movies, True Detective and so on, where FBI agents and detectives have their case wall.
Oh dear, I am a tourist.
Apparently those TV shows that I've just had on there, they're quite interesting to watch. Some of them are quite funny as well. No, I've not seen them all properly yet. There are elements of leveling up, so you can add different perks to your guns or abilities, which is quite cool. You do need to pick up those attribute points, so to speak, before you can do that. So I haven't got enough yet to even enable one of them. And you also have these, it's like a advent calendar of sorts for political posters that you see around Bright Falls. I don't know what happens when you collect them all, but when you view them, you can then go to your mind place and view that advent calendar. I'm assuming something happens. The profiling desk is quite interesting, where you do need to profile suspects in order to learn more about them and get inside their head, so to speak, and feel how they feel, think how they think. And that gives you a different set of goals, which you then unravel based off of your profiling. So here I am going back to the breakout room in this area to do a quick save. And you'll be able to see the bit where you can switch between Alan and Saga as well. The breakout rooms are the only place you can save as well. You can't save anywhere else in the game, so there's no sort of instant quick save. So if you've played for 10-15 minutes, done some progression, and you die or your game crashes, you'll have to do all of that again. The game does auto-save as well, but anytime you want to manually save or quick save, you will have to go to a breakout room. And they're not too far apart. They seem to be logically placed, so by the time you do a whole bunch of progression, you naturally come into a breakout room anyway. So now I'm going to go to watery. You don't drive the car itself. The getting into the car is essentially a load screen. And I'll skip this bit because no one wants to see a load screen or a cutscene even.
This could be a breakthrough.
Okay, so we're now in watery. This place is quite gloomy, I found. Gives me strong Silent Hill vibes. You'll see what I mean in a moment.
Meanwhile, I think me and Wake will have a chat. Maybe I can shake something loose.
Silent Hill minus the eerie music.
But remember what happened with the soldier?
Although speaking of music, there is going to be something coming up shortly, which is a bit of a surprise. It is a bit of a spoiler as well, so if you don't like spoilers, then you may want to skip the rest of this video.
Placed me in a trailer somewhere in Watery.
It's not a major spoiler, it's just something quite funny.
I should ask around.
Not funny, but, well, yeah, funny, interesting. The torch, unlike in Cyberpunk and other games, the torch is actually quite useless in daylight. You also can't shine your torch through a dark window or a doorway into a room that's quite dark, which is quite quirky. Again, just like that bathroom, path tracing not working properly, or lighting not working properly. So here I've just found one of those political posters. I'm going to go to the calendar, and I should see that new one on that board. There we go, on the top left. So again, I don't know what it does when you collect all of them. I'm assuming something happens or you unlock something. I've not looked into it. I'd like to keep those things as a surprise. But the detailing in towns like this the whole color grading is very cinematic, very True Detective, very Silent Hill. I really like that, and there's immense amounts of density and detail all over. Nothing's interactive, obviously, it's all baked and static, but it does the job. I'm just checking what the goals are at the moment, and I'm going to be doing some exploring and speaking to some locals. You can't speak to everyone in this town or game in general. There are certain people you can speak to, but it's just a case of walking up to everyone and seeing where the prompt pops up. You can see conversation pointers on your map as well as location points of interest.
More like underwatery.
But I just like to explore,
I'll
walk
have to tell
around,
Casey that
take it
one
all
later.
in, and find people as I mosey about.
Hello. Do you have a second?
Ah, long time
This guy's-
and no see, Miss Anderson.
I'm sure I've seen him earlier on in the game at
Odin
some
are
point.
not here. They are old tricksters always sneaking off.
There's quite a few vehicles dotted
Sorry.
about as well.
No,
You
I wanted to
can't
ask you
drive
about
any of the
something else.
vehicles. The vehicles are all static, which
Can you
kind of
put me to any
confuses me in a
trailers
way
around
because
here?
none of the details are
Sure.
vehicles are that well
Watery
detailed.
Lighthouse Trailer Park.
By comparison, in Cyberpunk,
You'll move
there's
the skill
details on
outfit.
everything on vehicles,
Owns
from
many
the
things in
flecks
town.
of paint
And where is
to the
Elmo?
tires themselves
I
and the
saw
undercarriage
Elmo
when
and
you
his
move the camera
brother
around.
at the bridge.
Don't get any of those
Well,
details on this game.
used
Even the
to be
reflections
rich.
aren't as high fidelity as they are on Cyberpunk. And Cyberpunk's maxed out as well, just like this one is, with path tracing and ray reconstruction. Both games run similarly as well, so in terms of technology and performance, okay, you do need
Trailer park is a good
high-end
place to look for
hardware,
a
or
trailer.
high-end GPU at
Keep
least,
it
to
simple, Saga.
make use of that performance and those features.
I need to find
But
Elmo Casella.
on the upside, Alan Wake 2 does have much lower CPU requirements. I think it's RX 7300 or 3700 as the minimum. And you can see there, I'm using 20 to
Okay,
25% of the
Catch you
total
soon.
CPU of a 12700 KF, whereas Cyberpunk would typically run 65% out in the city, mainly because Cyberpunk has all that traffic density, all those NPCs to calculate. All of that stuff is being done
Excuse me.
on the
Do
CPU.
you know
There's
how
also a
I
real-time weather system and day-night cycle,
the
so
show?
all of that stuff is being done
I wonder
on
if
the
I'm the first
CPU.
FBI agent
Whereas
to ever
Alan
get
Wake 2
shushed.
doesn't have a rolling day-night cycle. There are no NPCs to calculate, they're all static, scripted anyway. So for a much slower paced game, that kind of tracks. So there is a breakout room in this hall as well, and I will switch over to Alan's part of the story from here. And this is why I like to explore from time to time, because you get these little battery packs and loot items that you can pick up. And then we have some reflections. It's all very nice. Visually, this is definitely one of the most pleasing to look at games as well.
I
The
feel
moose,
bad
I
for
don't know
these
what the
guys.
moose do or deer. But in your mind palace or mind place, you can approach the moose, or I was able to speak to it. There's apparently 11 of them to find. I don't know again what happens when you find all 11. So that spill on the floor, that's where you switch between Alan and Saga. I'll be going through there in a moment. So it isn't an instant switch, you do go through this loading animation. Interestingly, there's no shader pre-compilation in this. The first load, I didn't see anything like that at all. So whatever it's doing, there's no real traversal stutters to speak of. There's no shader stuttering, which is quite cool. I guess Northlight Engine is quite well optimized in that regard. But you do need an SSD.
I had seen the title page of another manuscript, Return. I didn't remember writing it, but
so here's Alan's case
I
board.
had to find it.
For Alan, it's called the plot board. And you do get these words of wisdom as well, and those words of wisdom are similar to Saga's weapons, perks, upgrades. So you can learn new abilities and gain extra health, and so on.
I would write a new draft of initiation to reach Parliament Tower using another murder site.
So this is the part that I said is potentially a spoiler for some, but it's really quite interesting, and I found it quite unique. It's unlike anything I've played before or experienced in a game before, but it was quite fun at the same time as well, and the music is amazing.
Demons he wrestles with in the dark hours of the night. Together with our house band, the divine old gods of Asgard, we have created something very special. The song is called Herald of Darkness.
So if you're wondering what that light is behind Alan in his man bag, that's the bulb, the sort of lantern you get given a bit earlier on. It just means it's currently captured, or one of the lights is inactive because it's inside the lamp, and that's Alan's part of the story where you can switch between the two worlds, which then instantly changes your surroundings, so you can access new areas and so on. So during this part of the quest, I didn't know exactly what to expect. I'd seen some bits in trailers and preview videos on YouTube, but I wasn't prepared for what was about to happen. It's confusing at first, but kind of makes sense fairly quickly. Again, the quality, compared to Cyberpunk, where Song and Reed are at the event, and you get that angel demonstration on the stage, that was impressive, but I'd say this is even more impressive, just for the sheer scale of it, and it's interactive as well, as you'll see shortly. I like the fact that they've used actual video as well, so it's a proper music video, and you're just experiencing it in full 3D. Now these reflections are very impressive. Even if I turn path tracing off and ray tracing off, the screen space would be covering all of this, which is what I meant earlier when I said low looks just as good as high in a lot of other games. So there's no compromise really on things like this, the reflections. They'll be a little softer, maybe a little blurrier, but really you won't have a bad experience on low if you can't run it on the highest settings in this game.
Yeah, but with the clicker I chase those frights away. You, so true.
So I'm just trying to figure out where to go now, because it isn't immediately obvious, but it does make sense as you just look around and listen and watch the song complete. The colours and volumetrics are just insane in this. It's very similar again on low, but path tracing with all the volumetrics up and everything maxed, it does look very impressive. And DLSS quality 3440, 1442, we are pushing over 100 FPS here. and that's with frame generation disabled. Ray reconstruction does gain you a few FPS as well. For me it was about 9 frames per second, and it looks sharper with shadows and reflections, so it's a complete win-win. It's actually on by default if you turn on ray tracing.
And the award goes to Alienware.
And all your stories of crime and chilling thrillers of hard-boiled killers became bestsellers.
I'm not quite sure why he picked up another light there, even though he already had one in his bag. I'm assuming that's because the nature of Alan's side of the story, you can do things in whatever order you want. So because I'd already got one before, I may not have got that one then. Could have come here first, I guess. I'm not 100% sure. Ladders are quite cool in this, in that you can speed go up them and you can speed go down them as well. Just hold shift as if you're running. Such a simple thing, but not a lot of games get that right. So there you go. I use the light, instantly changes your surroundings and opens up new areas. The dark place, as Alan calls it. I could use the torch in here as well, but I prefer to just have the ambience. We should get some enemies shortly as well, or shadow people who turn into enemies.
But there is more to it than meets the eye. I never meant for it to ruin my life that
So this bit
way.
confused me at first. It wasn't obvious that you have to do things a certain way or in a certain order. So those arrows pointing on the neon signs, we're supposed to follow them in the correct order, from what I could gather. And it wasn't obvious at first. I was just going around in circles trying to find where I need to be next. At the same time looking at the projections of the music video. So that was a bit of a distraction, I suppose. Okay, so it is here where I need to be, but I need to activate another light somewhere, which wasn't immediately obvious. So I'm just trying to figure that out. You can see there the reflections off the taxi's paintwork. There are reflections there, but they're not as crystal clear as they are on Cyberpunk. So they've both got pros and cons in the way they employ path tracing, especially reflections. So I think it was about now where I figured it out, the correct order. No, it was on the phone box. Okay, so the camera's activated there, so that's a good sign. And then just following the arrows. And you can see as you approach they activate, so you do need to do those bits in that particular order. And now we've got the light I can activate. And there we are. The way it's done is really cool, I thought. It's completely different to anything I've played before. Alan Wake 1 I wasn't too much of a fan of. I played it shortly after release and I put it down and never looked at it again. More recently, before number 2 came out, I did revisit it on Steam, and again I tried it for a few hours, couldn't get into it. The controls were not to my liking. I know the remaster does have improved controls or modern controls, but the story itself and just the concept, it just felt a bit too tedious and a bit too bland for my liking, whereas this, because it feels so much like a Resident Evil game, mixed with a bit of Silent Hill and some of the Resident Evil remakes, it just fell into my sort of exact street of exactly what I like in a survival horror game. And I think that's the main thing, it's more survival horror now, with a bit of weirdness thrown in like this, versus just playing out a story. There's still a bit more to go of this act. Only just picked up the flare gun. It's probably one of my favourite guns now. And you'll see why in just a moment. Speaking of guns, what I really do like about this game is the sounds and the feel of the guns. They have punch and impact, which is really satisfying to use. Many games like this don't get that right. Even some of the Resident Evil, I played Resident Evil 4 recently with the Separate Ways DLC, and the guns in that are good, but they don't have that punch that you are used to. Battlefield games, for example, have punch. Cyberpunk didn't have punch until the latest update with 2.0, and that now has guns which feel powerful and you want to use them. And it's the same here. Even the flare gun, it just feels awesome to use. The way those guys move reminds me of Cyberpsychos from Cyberpunk as well. A lot of unrelated similarities between them. And naturally, there's a lot of Control references in this game as well. Remedy being Remedy, it would be abnormal if there weren't. The flare gun is really good for dispatching 2 or 3 of these guys in one go. Just make sure they're close enough together and you'll get rid of them. So we're coming up towards the end of this bit. A few more guys to remove from this dark place. And just like Alan Wake 1, the batteries don't last too long. I think they last a bit longer than they did in the first game, but you do end up changing batteries often, and I found myself running out of batteries completely as well. So you kind of have to pay it to the next area and hope that there's something to loot which has batteries in it. A lot of lockers can be looted, and most of them do contain batteries, so it's well worth checking any walls of lockers that you see, whether it's in the distance or not. You will get some stuff out there. probably worth talking about the control mechanics in this as well. I find it really good, just like Resident Evil, just like Ratchet and Clank and other third-person games. It does feel really nice to use, especially with mouse and keyboard. Normally people use controller for games like this just because it feels better, but this is one of the few games where it just feels right, no matter what control method you use. So is this bit over, or is it not?
That was pretty good. A vision.
These are pretty cool, those portals, you have to align them, which then shows you a story segment.
Such a dark place, am I trapped in here? Is this real? I cannot remember.
You'll see them dotted around. There's quite a few in the train tunnels before this part of the game. Some of them only appear in the dark place, so you do need the light to sort of switch between places. And here's Alan's plot board kind of style area. It does change your surroundings as you do those. The way they've done this just seamlessly transitions into this from the game and back to the game. It's just really cool. Normally it's a cutscene or an obvious transition, but with this, it's not like that. It just feels it's a part of the gameplay.
And I thought this place couldn't get any stranger.
Champion of flight.
Catchy, right?
I think that's the guy that gave me the first light.
Lost in dirt.
And that's the end of that. So I usually do a quick save and a manual save just in case. You never know. I've had some games before where a quick save corrupts and it doesn't load. So having that manual save is my way of having a backup. And for the last part of the video, just going to continue with Saga for a bit. Funny enough, this bit does take longer to load than the actual game itself. This is a good 10 seconds or so, whereas the game, within 6 seconds you're in when you first load the game. So I think I was just seeing here if there's anything new in my cases notes. It doesn't look like there is at the moment. So this is what I mean by switching between Saga and Alan. You can complete one chapter or one section of Alan's story, go to a break room, save, switch to Saga. So you get two sides of the game. It kind of ends up being two games in one. Different protagonists in each one in the same universe or in the same world. So Coffee World on the left is where all the video previews were showing us before launch of the game. I won't go into there on this video, there's not really much need, it's been covered to death anyway. I just thought I'd show this part of the game, how the transitions are between Alan and Saga's parts, how these conversations play out with NPCs, some of the technology involved with path tracing and the quirks and observations that I've made. So yeah, to sum up Alan Wake 2, really good game. I think all of the review scores that I've seen so far, they're well deserved. It is a high 8 or 9 out of 10 for me. There are a few quirks here. Missing reflex features, for example, is one such. Baked lighting in it was taking priority over path traced lighting and GI especially in many areas, so that needs to be addressed perhaps on a 4090 or a high-end card, especially when using the higher settings. Shouldn't be taking priority over path tracing, to be honest. And also those settings presets, setting to low doesn't set everything to low, and setting to high doesn't set everything to high either. So those are little issues that they can easily fix, I think, with a patch. There's no reason why you should have to manually go through and then toggle settings to lowest or highest if you want to. It looks really good even when you set everything manually to low anyway, so I don't know why they've done that. There is a bit of frame pacing judder when moving the camera around using frame generation, so that needs to be looked into as well. I'm sure that can be an easy patch fix, but these are all minor things. By and large, the game runs and looks really good, and the gameplay itself is fun, and the game will make you jump throughout, like it did to me earlier on. So yeah, it's a really good game. I really recommend it. I know it's an Epic Store only exclusive at the moment, but there's only a matter of time before it comes to Steam and maybe even other storefronts as well. But yeah, for the price it is, it's well worth it. It doesn't use any de novo or anything like that, so they've done really well in that regards. The CPU usage isn't very high, but because of the nature of the game that it is, that's why. And the GPU usage is high, but it's deservedly high because it's using path tracing or ray tracing, and it's using all of those illumination effects. Even though some of them are missing, it's just one of those things really. But yeah, check the game out if you like survival horror.